Hello, everyone, and welcome to day 4 of the Brothers War spoilers. Today, from Magic 30, we got a bunch of new spoilers to talk about. So let's jump right in and get into these new cards. But before we do that, again, we want to thank our sponsor, Caffeinated Gamer, for sponsoring this video. And also remind you to like and subscribe to our videos so you can see more of our content going forward. All right, so let's get into the latest Brothers War spoilers. Alright, so our first one is a lower rarity, a uncommon, the Fall of Krug. For 6 mana, you get to choose target opponent. They destroy a target land. You can destroy a target land the player controls. And then the Fall of Krug deals 3 damage to that player and 1 damage to each creature they control. I think this is probably a little bit more commander maybe focused and or limited focus. I don't think it's going to see any standard play because it just costs too much and we simply have better options for 5 mana. Alright, we got 2 of the construct at the common level here that I want to talk about. So Depth Charge Colossus costs 9 mana, again very high cost. Its prototype cost is for 6 mana. It becomes a 6/6. Depth Charge Colossus doesn't untap during your untap step, and you have to pay 3 mana to untap Depth Charge Colossus. If you cast it for all 9, it's a 9/9. I think it's probably maybe limited playable, but beyond that, I don't think we're going to see much of it because having to pay 3 mana to untap it just seems like a burden that nobody's ever going to want to play. Alright, and that brings us to our second, Russ Goliath. So this one costs 10 mana. If you use prototype, it's 5. And this is in green, and you get a 3/5 creature. It has reach and also trample. If you do cast it for 10 for some reason, it becomes a 10/10. So for 10/10 with trample, that's a pretty good ability. Probably still only limited playable, but I could see in the right deck that has a lot of Power Stone tokens in it, maybe you would consider playing one of them. Alright, and that brings us to Arcane Proxy. This is a 7 mana artifact creature wizard. Its prototype cost is 3 in blue. You get a 2/1. When Arcane Proxy enters the battlefield, if you cast it, exile target instant or sorcery card with mana value less than or equal to Arcane Proxy's power from your graveyard. Copy that card. You may cast the copy without paying its mana cost. So for 3 mana, you're getting a 2/1, and then you can get a 1 or 2 cost instant from your graveyard to cast. That's a pretty decent ability. So I think it will see some play with just that idea of I can go dig back into my graveyard to recast a impulse or a consider or something like that that would gain me some card advantage at that point. If you cast it for 7 mana, then you get a 4/3 and that ability. But again, it's probably in my mind really a 3 mana spell that is likely to see some play in standard. But again, it's going to have to find the right deck. It looks like from what we've gotten today, there's going to be a lot more artifact creature support. So maybe there's an artifact creature deck that wants to use it down the road. Next, we have Hall of Tagsin. Okay, this is a land. You can tap it for colorless mana. For 1, you can filter, add 1 mana of any color. And for 4 mana, you can create a tap Power Stone token. Again, this is one of those cards that I don't see seeing play in standard. It just costs too much to use its ability. 4 mana to create a tap Power Stone token is a lot. I mean, I guess if you've got a lot of Power Stone tokens lying around, you don't need the mana from Hall of Tagsin, then you might do that. So maybe it's a one of in a artifact creature deck with that idea of I'm going to try to create a Power Stone every turn I can, so that way I can continue to grow my mana base to cast larger and larger artifact creatures. But outside of that, I don't see it seeing play. Next, we have from Liberator Urza. Again, thanks for putting these cards together on the Magic 30 Twitter stream for us, because you're the only one who's gotten some out there. So we're going to use your stuff to get cards out to people. So for 4 mana, we get to see Tokazia, Dig Site Mentor. She costs 4 total mana, a colorless, a green, a white, and a blue, so in Bant colors for this legendary human artificer. It's a 4/3, so good stats for the 4 mana. And creatures you control have Vigilance and Surveil 1. The Vigilance, I think, is a really good ability, because a lot of times when we're looking at decks that are creature focused, having to tap to attack can be sometimes a negative thing. But if all your creatures have Vigilance, then that allows them to do other things too, in addition to just being able to block. So I think Tokazia might be your 1 or 2 of in a creature deck that's really focused on trying to win the game quickly. And then Tokazia, good sideboard card, certainly something that can help you stabilize in the mid game if it's going to go longer, because then you can attack and still have your creatures back to block as well. And for 8 mana, you can exile Tokazia, Dig Site Mentor from your graveyard, return any number of target artifact cards with total mana value 10 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield, activate only as a sorcery. So, and I think this is where Tokazia might really shine, and why I think it might see play, is 8 mana is a lot of mana. But because of the Power Stones and other things that we're seeing in the set, it's not unrealistic that by the time you get to the mid to late game, that Tokazia has been removed by your opponent, it's sitting in your graveyard, you've got other creatures in your graveyard as well that are artifact creatures, you want to bring 1 or more back, this is a way to do that. Now, the limitation here is at mana value 10 or less. Most of the stuff that we've seen is very expensive so far, so I'm not sure if it's going to work unless we start to see some lower cost artifacts that we would actually want to go ahead and cast and play with. Next we have Lorena of the Third Path, so another one of the Third Path member teams. From the lore, Lorena was one of the people who was studying the Silex to understand how it worked, and for 2 colorless and a white mana, you get a legendary creature who's a human artificer with Vigilance, which is nice. When Lorena of the Third Path enters the battlefield, destroy up to 1 target artifact or enchantment. You can tap it and target opponent, and you also then could draw a card. So I don't really like that ability. I don't think you'd use it too often, because that's giving your opponent some card advantage. But I think it might have some playability as a sideboard card, because simply entering the battlefield can kill an artifact or kill an enchantment, and that's a big ability. And we've already seen Cathar Commando see sideboard play throughout the last year plus as a creature that can come into play. You can cast it at flash speed, it can become a blocker, and or then it can destroy an artifact or an enchantment. So I think Lorena of the Third Path might have some sideboard playability because of that ability to kill an artifact or an enchantment. Our next card is Hajir, Loyal Bodyguard. Hajir is the friend and colleague of Mishra. He's kind of the guy that, early in the lore is given responsibility for watching over Mishra, and it's nice to see him get a card here, and it's in green and red, and he's a legendary human soldier. So that kind of goes along with the soldiers that we've seen so far from this set, but also from Dominaria United. So that's nice, and he's 3/3. To me, right there, that makes him playable, because you're getting for 2 mana, you're getting a 3/3 creature, and that's overstatted. Putting a 3/3 on the board for 2 mana usually kind of either locks down the board state for your opponent if they're playing an aggro deck, because getting through a 3/3 is hard, and getting it on turn 2, assuming you got the right mana, is really nice. And then you can sacrifice Hajir Loyal Bodyguard, and your legendary creatures you control get +1 and gain indestructible till the end of the turn. So I'm not sure if this would fit into a legendary deck, but we already have a number of good legendary colors in these Gruul colors, so it'd be interesting to see if it might slot in potentially to the deck that we're currently seeing in Standard that's in Gruul, because there are enough legendary creatures in there that it might make it worthwhile to have him in there. But we'll have to see. But certainly a good card, just not sure where it fits yet, and we'll have to kind of see more cards from the set to kind of figure out that a little bit further. Our next card is Harbin Vanguard Aviator. For a white and a blue mana, you get a legendary human soldier. This Harbin, just for those of you who don't know the lore, Harbin is Urza's son, and he spends most of the Brothers' War as a reserve person, and he's going to be somebody who is flying Thopters to on a variety of missions, and he's actually the guy that finds Argoth in the lore in the Brothers' War book. And obviously that's going to become the place where the final battle of the Brothers' War is going to take place. So enough about who Harbin is. Let me talk about why this is a really, really good card. First, it's 2 mana. And it's flying. And it's a 3/2. Immediately, this is a great card in a lot of decks. But it's also, I think the big thing here is he's a human soldier. And I really like that. We've been looking for soldiers to slot into the soldier deck with Valiant Veteran at the head of that. I think Harbin is a snap inclusion in this deck because his ability is so powerful. So when you attack with 5 or more soldiers, creatures you control get +1/+1 and gain flying until end of turn. And the key thing here is it's when you attack with 5. It doesn't matter if Harbin's even attacking. So you can have Harbin in your hand. You can get your 5 soldiers out on the field. You play Harbin. They gain flying. They get +1, and you swing and you win the game. So I think Harbin is a really powerful card in the soldier builds that we're going to see for Brothers' War season. So I'm excited to play it. I'm excited to try it because I think it's going to be real powerful. And there's going to be times when it's on turn 4, you just swing in because you've got 5 creatures out there, and you basically take out your opponent if they don't have a way to deal with Harbin, or they don't have a way to deal with the creatures that are now flying on your side. Next, we have Diabolic Intent. Now, Demonic Tutor is the card that kind of starts this. And Demonic Tutor for 2 black mana, you got to search your library for a card. Well, Diabolic Tutor is in that same vein. You have to sacrifice a creature to play it, but then you can search your library for 2 mana and put a card in your hand, and then you can shuffle. Which again, this is such a great ability. I know it's going to see play in a variety of decks. The Esper deck, I think, really would want a couple copies of this, because simply having the ability to go say, you know what, I need a Rafine right now, I need a Shaldred right now, and I can go get that. Or in a case where you've got you're playing against a more aggro deck, you've got some board wipes in your deck, you go get one of those for this, and that works out great for you. So I think Diabolic Intent definitely is going to be a card you need to be on the lookout for, because it's going to see play, especially given the current format. Next, we have Visions of Phyrexia. For 2 colorless and 2 red mana, we get an enchantment that says at the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn. So for 4 mana, red gets basically draw 2. And that's awesome. Red typically, and red always gets to exile cards, and that's the way they get some advantage from that, and they can play them. But this is, for 4 mana, something you get to play every single turn. Now, this is not going to be a 4 of in any red deck, but the card advantage is amazing to continue to get extra cards turn after turn after turn after turn, and it's something that really is going to allow you to advance your board state, push you over the top. If you can get it out, it can keep it on the board. And the other part about it that I really like is at the beginning of your end step, if you don't play the card from exile this turn, create a tap Power Stone token. So say you've got 5 mana on the board, 6 mana on the board. At this point, you draw a land. I could play it, but I'd rather create a Power Stone token. That's something I want. Or it's a card that's just really not going to be usable given the circumstances of the current board state. It's easy to just say, I'm not going to play that one. I'll create a Power Stone token, and that'll help me going forward. So I think, there are going to be decks that want to play this. One of the things that I've continually been thinking about, given where we are, is a Hinata deck that wants to play a number of the cards that we're getting. And I think we're building more towards Hinata maybe getting back into the format. So for those of you guys aren't aware of what Hinata is a legendary creature from the Kamigawa set that allows you to reduce the cost of your spells by 1 mana for every target that they have. Which is a real powerful ability, but it also causes your opponents, when they target something of yours, they have to pay an additional mana as well. So this kind of fits into Hinata's idea of building board state, getting a lot of cards, and moving through your deck quickly to play a lot of things. So I think we'll see it. Not exactly sure where it fits yet. All right, our next card is Stasis Coffin. One of the heroes that we've talked about is Thanos. Urza saves Thanos at the end of the Brothers' War battle by telling him to get into the stasis coffin that they've created to basically entrap Mishra in, to take his power away. And Thanos, when the brothers have their conflict on Argoth, the stasis coffin is where Thanos ends up to save his life. And then Urza will eventually find the stasis coffin years later after he returns to Dominaria, and he will release Harbin from Thanos from it, and then Thanos will return to the world of the living. So for 3 mana, the stasis coffin is a legendary artifact. And for 2 mana, you can exile the stasis coffin. You gain protection from everything until your next turn. So I see Stasis Coffin certainly as something that, if you're in a slower deck, control deck, certainly would want to have this, or at least a copy or 2 of it, because what it can do is you can play it on turn 3 and then it just sits there. And if your opponent gets to the point where they can win the game, you can simply exile it and it protects you for everything from that turn. And that means that your opponent can't damage you. You gain protection from them, and that's a great ability. So basically, if you activate the stasis coffin, you're basically saying to your opponent, well, you're taking this turn off from being able to attack and do a lot of things. They can still cast cards, but they can't do any damage to you or do anything that would affect you, like a duress or something like that. So I think it's going to be a card that will see play in control builds. Next, we have Liberator Urza's Battle Thopter. For 3 mana, you get a legendary artifact creature that's a Thopter, and it's a 1/2, so not very powerful, but it has flash and flying. And you may cast colorless spells and artifact spells as though they had flash. And I think this is why this card, I think, is going to see play, definitely in our artifact builds of decks that are going to come out based on all the artifacts we're getting from the Brothers' War. Because this is, here, let me play this on turn 3. Turn 4, I untap. I do nothing. My opponent goes to their turn. They attack. I've got this 1/2 out there, and I'm using it to defend the board with. But I've got 4 open mana, and now I can drop an artifact or a couple of artifacts depending on the board state for myself in terms of my mana ability that can then become blockers, and they become surprise blockers that the opponent may not be able to deal with. And you can always drop this as an emergency blocker as well because of the flash ability. And it also has, when you cast a spell, if the amount of mana spent to cast that spell is greater than Liberator Urza's Battlethopter's power, put a +1/+1 counter on Liberator. So anytime you cast a spell that costs more than Liberator's power, you're going to start building up the +1/+1 counters on Liberator. And a lot of the spells that we've seen that are artifacts have high casting costs. So if we get to the point where you're getting to those spells, you're going to constantly be adding +1/+1 counters to Liberator Urza's Battlethopter. So it's very easy by the mid game. It's a 4/5 or a 5/6 that can really do some damage in the game. So definitely I think it's going to see play in the artifact build, and any deck that you're going to have spells that are going to cost more than 3 mana that can help get +1/+1 counters on it. I think that's a great place for this card to be. Next we have Portal to Phyrexia for 9 mana, this mythic rare artifact. When Portal to Phyrexia enters the battlefield, each opponent sacrifices 3 creatures. So for 9 mana, you kill 3 of the opponent's creatures. Not great, but it does something. And at the beginning of your upkeep, put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. It's a Phyrexia in addition to its other types. So if you can sneak Portal to Phyrexia out early, meaning you're not waiting until you have 9 lands in play to play this, but because of Power Stones and other things you're getting out on turn 5 or turn 6, then it becomes a really powerful card because you've made your opponent sacrifice 3 creatures, so there are at least 3 creatures in the graveyard that you get to choose the best of them on your next upkeep to put on the battlefield, or if you've got things in your own graveyard that you would like to replay, you can put them directly onto the battlefield. So I could see this potentially even, say, in a graveyard batters deck where you're pitching things into the graveyard that are high mana cost, that are artifacts that you would get back with this. Again, the prohibitive nature of the cost of 9 mana is what's going to determine whether it's actually playable or not. So one of the things that I'm looking for as this set continues to evolve is, are the Urzatron lands going to be in the set? If they are, this is very, very playable, and it's going to see play across decks because it won't really matter what kind of deck you're playing if you've got the Urza lands in play, because if you're not familiar with them, Urza lands, if you have all 3, they create a total of 7 mana. So 3 Urza lands and 2 others, that's 5. Now you have the Portal to Phyrexia on the battlefield on turn 5. And again, with things that create Power Stones, it could be even earlier than that if you've got Tron lands up. So very, very potentially powerful card. Where it's going to see play, not sure yet, but somebody's going to figure out how to use this to their advantage. All right, so now we got our third Planeswalker of the set, or actually, I guess, third official Planeswalker of the set, and Sahili Filigree Master. For 2 colorless, a blue and a red, you get a legendary Planeswalker Sahili that has 3 loyalty to start. For her +1 ability is Scry 1. You may tap an untapped artifact you control. If you do, draw a card. So obviously Sahili is going to go into an artifact deck because you're going to want to have that +1 draw a card ability easily activatable. For -2, you can create 2 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature tokens with flying. They gain haste until the end of turn. So if you need some blockers or even something to potentially finish off a game, you can create the Thopters to do that. And for -4, which is really rare when we think about emblems cost, you get an emblem with artifact creatures you control get +1, and artifact spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. So I think Sahili, while on the surface it is underwhelming, the emblem is actually what you're going to be after. I'm on the turn that Sahili comes into play, I'm going to +1 it. I'm going to hopefully tap an artifact I control, draw a card, scrying the 1 to get something that I really want, and then on the next turn, I'm likely to just -4 Sahili, remove her from the game, send her to the graveyard, but then get that emblem that all of my artifact creatures get +1/+1, and my artifact spells cost 1 less. Because we've been talking about throughout this video about how many creatures that are artifact creatures cost so much. So Sahili for 4 mana is a great way to start reducing that cost. We see that with the Urza cards as well. There's ways to reduce the cost. So I think what we might see is a Jeskai deck with Urza and Sahili in it as a way of reducing the cost of our artifact creature cards that we're going to put into play. Next we have Temporal Anchor. Okay, for 6 mana, 3 colorless, and 3 blue, you get a legendary artifact. At the beginning of your upkeep, you get to scry 2. So a great ability. Before you even get to draw your card, you get to decide whether you want one of the top 2 cards or you want to send those to the bottom of your deck. When you choose to put 1 or more cards on the bottom of your library while scrying, which is important, exile that many cards from the bottom of your library. So this is an interesting ability that what this is doing in essence is you get to scry 2. If you don't want the cards, you get to exile them. And during your turn, you may play cards exiled with the Temporal Anchor. So conceivably, this is a draw 3 every turn, but only one of them is going into your hand, and you've got this amount of cards in exile that during your turn you may play. So counter spells are probably going to be things you don't want to put there, but anything else that you might want to play on your own turn could be something you put in exile. It sits there until you need it. So I think Temporal Anchor is going to find a home in Standard and may find a home in other formats as well, because it's such a powerful ability to scry 2, filter your cards, and then take the other, whatever you don't want, and put it on, not on the bottom of your library, but into exile. And we also have other cards that do the same thing, like Consider, that lets you scry 1, and then you can put it at the top or the bottom. Well, when you scry, you get that same option. So I think you're going to see this put in a deck that will scry a lot, and because of that, you're going to have all these extra cards sitting in exile, and that's going to be a really powerful ability. And I just don't know, I can see somebody with this surviving 2 or 3 turns, having 5+ cards sitting in exile that they can play whenever they want to on their turn. And that card advantage just stacks up and makes it really hard on an opponent. All right, that brings us to Erza Silex. For 3 mana, you get the legendary artifact here. And it's a little bit different than Karn Silex. Karn Silex comes into play tapped. It costs the same mana, but it comes into play tapped. You can't use it on that turn. Erza Silex, you can absolutely use on the turn it comes in, but you have to pay 2 colorless and 2 white mana to exile Erza Silex. Each player chooses 6 lands they control, destroy all other permanents, activate only as a sorcery. So Erza Silex is not only destroy all non-land permanents on the field, it can also be destroy some of your land permanents as well. So this is, you get this late in the game, your opponent has 8 to 10 mana on the field. They're going to have to sacrifice some of their mana as well with Erza Silex. So control is definitely going to want this. We've seen since the banning of the Meat Hook Massacre, cards turning to Karn Silex as a tool to use that can go ahead and clear off the board So I think we'll see Erza Silex in a similar light. Now, this one, obviously, the white mana requirement is important, so it's going to have, you have to go in a deck that has white. But given that, I think overall the ability to play it the turn it comes into play, it costs 1 more mana to activate than Karn's does, but I think that's really, really powerful. And the other ability here that I think helps to make it even more valuable is when Erza Silex is put into exile from the battlefield, you can pay 2. If you do, search your library for a Planeswalker card, reveal it, put it in your hand, then shuffle. So you're using Erza Silex late in the game. Now what you can do, if you have 9 mana sitting around, which is not unlikely late in the game, especially with Power Stone creation, you can simply wipe the board, go get a good Planeswalker from your deck, to Fairy for example, and then on your next turn, because you've got 6 mana, you can then play that one, and off you go with that. And your opponent, they're in top, they probably are in top deck mode at this point. So you're going to have a nice advantage with being able to ensure yourself for that extra 2 mana of having a Planeswalker in the game battling for you. And I think that's going to be a really, really powerful ability. I expect to see Erza Silex see play. Again, like many of the cards we talked about today, it's figuring out which deck they go in. And I think that's the thing is, as we walk through Brothers War season, that's what we're going to have to kind of look at cards and figure out where they fit to find out where we're going to see them in Standard. All right, that's it for day 4 of Brothers War spoilers. A lot of exciting stuff that we saw over this weekend. In the comments, tell me what you think. Am I wrong? Am I right about stuff? And again, thanks to Caffeinated Gamers for sponsoring this video. And please remember to like and subscribe if you've stayed with us all the way to the end. And appreciate you watching it. And I'll see you next time.